Today, the world is talking about one thing and one thing only: The Reckoning, the four-part Netflix-style documentary that exploded on the internet and dragged Diddy's darkest secrets into the sunlight. Just 48 hours ago, this film dropped, and within minutes, clips were everywhere. Headlines changed, old rumors came alive again, and suddenly, the murder of Tupac Shakur, one of the biggest unsolved cases in American history, was shoved right back to the center of global attention. The documentary didn't hold back. It showed never-before-heard confessions, old interrogation tapes, gang meeting claims, and emotional interviews from people who said they were there when everything went down. For the first time, the public wasn't seeing scattered rumors. They were seeing the timeline, a narrative, a pattern, and every piece of that pattern pointed toward the same man, Sean "Diddy" Combs. The tone online shifted instantly. This wasn't some fan theory or YouTube conspiracy anymore. This was a polished, cinematic, deeply researched documentary, and every frame felt like it was accusing someone. People started asking the questions that were buried for years. Why was Diddy never investigated properly? Why did these testimonies get ignored? And why does every road in this story keep looping back to him? Before we go deeper into how this documentary dragged brand new attention onto an almost 30-year-old murder case, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon, because we go deeper, we break stories earlier, and you never want to miss updates like this. Now let's get back to the story. Inside The Reckoning, the first episode sets the tone. It doesn't sensationalize, it documents. It opens with the claim that Diddy allegedly offered $1 million to Southside Crips and gang affiliates in exchange for killing Tupac. It shows witnesses saying it happened at multiple events across multiple cities. It stitches together interviews, receipts, law enforcement commentary, and even past interrogations of Keefe D, the man who has publicly spoken about the Las Vegas night like he was revisiting a memory that never left him. But what really shook audiences wasn't just the allegation itself, it was how naturally it flowed with everything we already knew. The jealousy, the rivalry, the fame, the fight at MGM Grand, the gang politics. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces fit in a way nobody expected. People rewatched old clips of Diddy denying everything, and suddenly those clips felt different, less confident, more defensive. And the documentary made sure you noticed that too. Every denial is paired with someone contradicting it. Every time Diddy says nonsense, the next scene throws in Keefe D giving specific details. Names, locations, amounts, conversations. And by the time episode 1 ends, the viewer's mind isn't calm. It's racing. Because whether true or not, whether provable or not, the story feels complete. It feels like a motive. It feels like a setup. It feels like a blueprint of something much darker than hip-hop beef. What's shocking is how many people who were once silent suddenly started speaking. Former detectives, old friends, witnesses. Even Suge Knight's old interviews resurfaced, adding more fuel to the fire. The documentary didn't create new accusations. It revived the old ones just enough to make them louder, sharper, and suddenly harder for authorities to ignore. And that is where this story begins. Not with the murder from 1996, not with the gang wars, not with the rumors that floated for decades, but with a documentary that shook the internet so hard that even law enforcement was forced to reopen files they thought were long dead. Part 1 ends here, but this is only the setup. The real story begins when the evidence starts connecting, and when Diddy realizes The Reckoning isn't just a film, it's a warning. The pressure around Diddy began tightening the very next morning, when clips from The Reckoning flooded every corner of the internet. People weren't just reacting, they were connecting dots in real time, revisiting old interviews, forgotten police notes, and statements that never made sense until now. Suddenly, the story the world thought it knew about Tupac's final days started to feel incomplete, dangerously incomplete. Everything centered around one chilling thread. Multiple people from completely different places and times, all repeating the same claim, that Diddy had been quietly making an offer, a massive amount of money to anyone willing to take Tupac out. And now, for the first time ever, Viewers were hearing those allegations in the raw voices of the people who were actually there. You can feel the tension build as more footage rolls. A table covered in old case files, faded photographs, audio recordings that were never supposed to be public. Inside them, investigators from the 90s talk candidly about Diddy's name popping up again and again during interviews. Not as gossip, not as speculation, but as a point of concern they couldn't ignore, yet couldn't fully prove. Then comes the moment that made millions freeze, the uncut Keefe D interrogation audio. No edits, no explanations, just his calm voice describing the meetings, the offer, the car, the street, the moment everything changed. He talks about the white Cadillac. He talks about Baby Lane's anger. He talks about Diddy like someone revisiting a business deal, not a murder. For viewers, the effect is unsettling. It's too detailed to dismiss, too consistent to call coincidence, especially when you realize these alleged meetings didn't happen once. They reportedly happened in multiple cities. Different dates, same story, same promise. And as these details stack up, you start to see the picture forming. A young superstar rising too fast, threatening the power structure of an entire industry. A rivalry that wasn't just personal, but financial, strategic, calculated. The documentary also digs into motive in a way nobody had dared to before. Jealousy, reputation, image. The fear of being overshadowed by someone whose star was burning brighter every day. Old photos appear showing Tupac with people Diddy cared about deeply. Clips replay where Diddy's expression tightens when Tupac's name is mentioned. Suddenly, old interviews start to sound like warnings that were hiding in plain sight. Social media exploded with theories. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to breaking down every frame. Retired detectives began speaking publicly for the first time in years, saying they always felt something was off in the original investigation. And that maybe, just maybe, they had been looking in the wrong direction all along. What made the situation even more explosive was how fast the public turned. Fans began revisiting Tupac's own words, his interviews, his accusations, his fear that someone powerful wanted him gone. When you hear Tupac himself say, "I have proof, things I can say," suddenly everything hits different. Everything feels heavier. And in that growing storm of evidence, rumors, and rising pressure, one question started echoing everywhere. If all of this was known, hinted at, or whispered about for nearly 3 decades, why was nothing ever done? That question is what pushes law enforcement back into the center of the story. Old detectives contacted, files reopened, tips resurfacing after years of silence. And for the first time, you can feel the momentum shifting away from rumors and toward accountability. Because what comes next isn't just people talking. It's people demanding action. It's investigators reconsidering their old assumptions. It's the walls finally beginning to close in. And that's when everything starts to accelerate. As the storm intensified, something unexpected began to happen. People who had stayed silent for decades, writers, producers, security staff, and even ex-law enforcement started speaking up. Not publicly at first, but in quiet phone calls, anonymous emails, private messages to journalists. It was as if the reckoning cracked open a door they thought would never open again. One former Vegas investigator said something chilling. "We were told to stop looking in certain directions." He didn't name names, he didn't have to. Because the silence around this case had always felt unnatural, like something or someone was keeping the lid screwed tight. But now that the documentary put everything under a microscope, those old fears began collapsing under the weight of public pressure. At the same time, people started revisiting Diddy's interviews from the 90s and early 2000s. Clips that once felt harmless now played like scenes from a psychological thriller. The awkward Breakfast Club moment when Diddy shuts down any mention of Tupac. The nervous laugh he gives, the way his eyes shift. Suddenly, viewers were analyzing every gesture, every pause, every "we don't entertain nonsense, my brother," and asking themselves, was this confidence or fear? And then there was 50 Cent. For years, people thought he was trolling, joking, stirring hype for fun. But suddenly, his old posts, his jokes, his jabs, they all looked different, like warnings, like he'd been trying to tell the world something long before Netflix ever touched the story. What made the narrative even more intense was the jealousy aspect, something so human, so raw. Diddy wasn't just competing in the industry. Many believe he was obsessed with staying on top. Seeing Tupac's rise, his charisma, his influence, his speed, it triggered something dark. The documentary even includes a montage showing how their trajectories rose and collided, frame by frame, like two trains racing toward impact. And then viewers learn about Sarah Chapman, Diddy's longtime love interest, photographed with Tupac in 1995. It's not just an image, it's a spark, a moment that shifts the emotional temperature of the story. For some people watching, this wasn't business. This wasn't rivalry. This was personal. The kind of personal that ignites dangerous decisions. When the documentary mentions this photo, social media loses its mind. Memes, threads, theories, millions of people dissecting whether jealousy was the final push that turned tension into violence. It becomes a viral explosion where thousands of posts say, "This wasn't random, this wasn't about gangs, this was a hit." Meanwhile, Keefe D's confession hits harder than ever. He's not whispering, he's not confused. He's calmly describing meetings, offers, money, the Cadillac, the crew, the moment the window rolled down. He even says which city Diddy allegedly spoke to them in. 4 cities, 4 opportunities, 4 chances to back out. But the offer never changed. And viewers can't stop watching because this isn't coming from bloggers or rumor accounts. It's coming from a man who was in the room, a man who was in the car, a man who explained every detail with chilling clarity. At this point, the story stops being entertainment and becomes something heavier, realer, darker. You can feel the public mood shift from shock to outrage to a demand for justice. People begin asking, if one man on the street could confess all this in an interview, what did the police know? What did the industry know? What did Diddy know they knew? The deeper viewers go, the more tangled and undeniable the picture becomes. Old beefs, old rivalries, old evidence suddenly align like puzzle pieces that were always meant to connect. And now, for the first time, millions of people see the full image. And in this rising, unstoppable momentum, the pressure on law enforcement grows so heavy that silence is no longer an option. Because this is no longer just a documentary. It's a reopening of history, and the truth is finally clawing its way to the surface. The most unsettling part came when the documentary shifted away from rumors and straight into physical evidence. The kind that makes your heart beat slow because you realize this isn't speculation anymore. This is testimony, paperwork, recordings, and confessions that have existed for years but were never placed together in one timeline. One clip shows Tupac speaking with a kind of calm intensity that feels different when you see it now. He says he has proof. He says he knows who was behind the first attack. He says he can back up every claim, but he refuses to share it with the world. When viewers hear those words today, knowing what would follow only months later, it hits with a new level of grief and clarity. It feels like watching a warning from someone who knew the danger was closer than anyone realized. Then the documentary cuts to retired detectives who explain how the Las Vegas police took notes referencing Diddy's name, not once, but multiple times in connection with Tupac. These weren't accusations from tabloids. These were official notations, concerns hinted at inside a department file. But the moment they tried to dig deeper, something in the case went cold. Leads died, witnesses disappeared, and detectives say they were pushed away from a direction that now seems impossible to ignore. But the real shockwave happens when Keefe D's old interviews are played back to back, uninterrupted. You hear him talk about meeting Diddy in Anaheim, then in Irvine, then in Vegas. He describes how money was allegedly offered, how the tension escalated, how Baby Lane carried the anger of being confronted by Tupac and the MGM Grand, and how everything converged on a single intersection in the middle of the Las Vegas Strip. The way he describes the scene sends chills through viewers. The white Cadillac rolling up, the window lowering, Tupac leaning out of the BMW unaware of what was seconds away. Suge Knight's head turning, the flashes, the screams, the chaos. For decades, these moments lived only in blurry memories and incomplete police reports. But now the documentary connects them with chilling simplicity, and suddenly old rumors feel like established facts. And then comes the moment that shakes the internet, the claim that Diddy allegedly paid $1 million for the hit. It's said casually, almost matter-of-factly, as if describing a payment for a performance or a contract deal. That casual tone is what terrifies people the most. It suggests planning, intention, a willingness to cross lines that no one could ever come back from. People start replaying Tupac's old interviews with new eyes, his comments about betrayal, his fear that someone in the industry wanted him gone, his insistence that he knew who was pulling the strings. Suddenly, his anger doesn't look like paranoia. It looks like a man trying to warn everyone he could. But perhaps the darkest moment in the documentary is when a former writer claims Tupac wasn't meant for this lifestyle at all. He was smart, artistic, sensitive, a thinker playing a role to reach people who needed hope. Hearing that now, knowing how violently it all ended, adds a layer of tragedy that grips viewers by the throat. It makes the alleged bounty feel even more devastating, as if an entire generation was robbed of someone who wasn't just a rapper, but a symbol. As the credits on that section roll, you can feel the shift in the room. This isn't entertainment anymore. People watching begin to lean forward, frozen, processing the weight of what they just heard. Because when you combine jealousy, rivalry, industry power, gang tensions, confessions, and $1 million motive, the conclusion becomes unavoidable. Someone wanted Tupac gone. Someone powerful. Someone protected. And now, after 28 years, the world is finally ready to point at the man who spent decades laughing off the rumors. The pressure is turning into outrage, and outrage is turning into action. As soon as The Reckoning finished streaming, something began happening that nobody expected. Old witnesses started resurfacing. People who had been ignored, dismissed, or overshadowed by louder voices suddenly found their stories being taken seriously for the first time in nearly 3 decades. And each story added another layer to a truth that had been buried under fear, power, and industry politics. One witness described how the atmosphere around Death Row and Bad Boy felt in the months before Tupac's death. He said the energy wasn't just tense, it was electric, like two storms moving toward each other. Everybody knew something was coming, he said, but nobody knew who was going to strike first. Those words didn't mean much back then. Now, after hearing Keefe D's details, viewers started understanding exactly what he meant. Another former insider claimed there was a specific moment, a private conversation, where Diddy's frustration with Tupac spilled over. According to this person, Diddy felt overshadowed. He felt like Tupac's voice was becoming too powerful, too influential, and that it was threatening his own empire. At the time, people brushed it off as ego or competition. Today, after watching the documentary, it sounds like motive. But the documentary doesn't stop at jealousy or rivalry. It dives deeper into the psychology of fame, the hunger for control, and the fear of losing status. It shows how Diddy carefully built himself into a brand, a mogul, a king of the industry, and how someone like Tupac, who was unpredictable and uncontrollable, posed a threat to that entire image. Interviews from the 90s begin to replay differently as experts analyze body language, tone, pauses, and emotional triggers. What once looked like confidence now looks like practiced avoidance. Then the film shifts again, this time into the PLAD and LVPD files that had never been publicly connected to each other. There were informants mentioning the same names, detectives raising the same suspicions, officers documenting the same allegations. Individually, those clues meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern investigators may have underestimated or chosen to overlook. Even more haunting is a segment where the documentary dives into Diddy's early days. The ambition, the pressure, the obsession with winning. Former associates recall how far he was willing to go to stay on top. One of them says, Diddy wasn't afraid of losing money. He was afraid of losing relevance. In an industry where relevance is power, that fear becomes dangerous. And as the documentary explores Tupac's final days, viewers began noticing eerie coincidences. People close to him felt something was wrong. Conversations became shorter. Paranoia increased. His circle got smaller. He even told friends he sensed betrayal. Betrayal coming from someone with influence, not from the streets. The timing of these conversations suddenly feels less like intuition and more like foresight. Meanwhile, clips of Suge Knight add yet another twist. Suge insists Tupac was alive and talking in the hospital. He describes laughing together, joking, planning their next moves. For viewers, this raises an uncomfortable question. If Tupac was stable, why did his condition change so suddenly? And who was allowed in the hospital during those hours? By the time this segment ends, the viewer's mind is overwhelmed with overlapping theories. Yet all of them point in the same direction, towards something bigger, darker, and far more coordinated than a random street incident. And that's precisely why momentum begins to shift from speculation to accountability. Journalists start demanding answers. Lawyers start reviewing old cases. Investigators, including some who left the force years ago, begin speaking publicly about what they were never allowed to pursue. It feels like a wave crashing against a dam. And that dam is finally cracking, because for the first time since Tupac's death, the world isn't just talking about rumors. The world is connecting evidence. The world is asking the questions that were never asked loudly enough. And once that starts, there is no going back. As public pressure kept building, something else began shifting behind the scenes, quietly, subtly, but unmistakably. Former detectives began receiving calls from journalists asking for comments on cases they thought were long dead. Retired officers who had boxed up their files decades ago were suddenly being asked for interviews. And each time a camera turned on, each time a microphone was placed in front of them, a familiar pattern emerged. Hesitation, then honesty. One detective admitted that back in the 90s, there were whispers about Diddy that nobody had the courage to chase, not because they didn't want justice, but because the music industry had more influence than people realized. Labels, executives, powerful connections, everyone had something to lose if the wrong name came up. It wasn't a cover-up, he said softly. It was a shutdown. Those words hit the internet like a lightning bolt. Meanwhile, fans began connecting the emotional tension between Tupac and Diddy through old clips that suddenly made sense. In one interview, Tupac talks about betrayal with a fire in his eyes, like he's speaking directly to someone off camera. In another, he talks about surviving the first attack and hints that the people behind it weren't random gang members. Footage that people had watched thousands of times before now felt like coded messages that the world had been too distracted or too afraid to decode. But what truly ignited this story in a new direction was how the reckoning resurfaced evidence most people had forgotten: the repeated mention of $1 million bounty. When that line played in the documentary, viewers didn't blink. They froze. Because when Keefe D described those meetings, he didn't hesitate. He didn't stumble. He spoke like someone recounting history, not speculation. And suddenly, everyone watching realized this wasn't a rumor that floated around late-night radio shows. This was testimony. This was repetition from multiple sources. This was a thread that had existed for decades, but no one had ever followed long enough to see where it led. Then came the part of the documentary that viewers said hit the hardest. A montage showing Tupac's final days, his laughter, his energy, his hope, overlaid with police reports, interrogation tapes, and industry whispers. A man destined for greatness, being hunted by forces the public never saw. It wasn't just emotional, it was infuriating. People started asking the questions that changed everything. Why didn't the original investigation connect these dots? Why were certain interviews brief and incomplete? Why did key witnesses suddenly go silent after meeting with detectives? And the internet responded with one voice: because someone with power didn't want this story told. Social media exploded with demands for action. Tens of thousands of people tagged the Las Vegas Police Department, the LAPD, even the FBI. Pressure began spilling over into real life. News outlets started requesting official responses. Lawyers began requesting access to sealed documents. and activists organized online petitions calling for a formal review. Meanwhile, industry insiders started distancing themselves from Diddy, old collaborators deleting photos, celebrities unfollowing him, artists making cryptic comments suggesting they always knew something was off. The music world began shifting away from him as if the documentary had flipped a switch no one wanted to touch before. And as the world's attention tightened around this story, one truth became impossible to escape. This wasn't just a cold case anymore. This was a time bomb that had finally gone off. With the weight of public pressure, emerging testimonies, and newly resurfaced evidence, something imminent was coming, something that would change the narrative forever. Because when the world demands answers, the walls protecting the truth begin to crumble faster than anyone expects. Everything shifted the moment law enforcement stepped forward, not through a planned press conference, not through a polished statement, but through a leak. Late at night, screenshots started circulating online, internal documents, investigator notes, and a request from within the department to reevaluate the evidence presented in the reckoning. At first, everyone thought it was fake, but within hours, multiple verified reporters confirmed it. Las Vegas police were officially reopening the file and focusing on names the world had whispered about for years. And at the center of that list was Diddy. The reaction was immediate. News stations cut into regular programming. Commentators who avoided the topic for years were suddenly analyzing every detail. Even former prosecutors began explaining how the documentary changed the legal temperature around the case. But the real turning point came when investigators revealed they had recovered new audio, archived conversations connected to old interviews, including previously unseen segments of Keefe D's confession. This wasn't recycled content. This wasn't rumor. This was evidence. The clip that shook the world features Keefe D calmly describing how Diddy allegedly gave the signal, how he spoke about money, how the offer stood no matter the city, and how the Cadillac crew knew exactly what to do when they found Tupac that night. Hearing him say those words again, now with law enforcement validating the timeline, turned skepticism into shock, and shock into certainty. And then the bombshell dropped. Investigators confirmed that for the first time ever, Diddy was officially listed as a person of interest in connection with Tupac's murder. Social media exploded. Millions of people watched the reckoning again, replaying scenes, analyzing every sentence, every expression, every silence. The narrative was shifting in real time, and Diddy was losing control of it. Meanwhile, in New York, something even more dramatic happened. A task force, quietly assembled weeks earlier, began coordinating with Las Vegas authorities. They weren't investigating Diddy's career. They weren't reviewing his contracts. They were examining connections between the alleged million-dollar offer, witness statements, and old communication logs that had resurfaced thanks to public pressure. And then, early in the morning, the news broke like thunder. Diddy had been taken into custody for questioning. No one expected it. No one believed the headline at first. But reporters confirmed that law enforcement executed a sealed operation and detained him at a private location for an extended interview. Helicopters circled overhead. Fans gathered in shock. Industry insiders began distancing themselves even faster. Music networks replaced his videos with breaking news banners. Inside the interview room, sources claim investigators played footage from The Reckoning, especially the part where 50 Cent said Diddy never liked Tupac because Tupac slept with someone Diddy once loved. They replayed Tupac's own interviews. They replayed Keefe D's confessions. And with each clip, the questions got more pointed. The momentum that had protected Diddy for decades evaporated. Every wall he built around this story cracked in real time. And for the first time since 1996, the narrative wasn't controlled by record labels, PR teams, or fear. It was controlled by evidence, by witnesses, by awakening voices that refused to stay silent any longer. The world watched as Diddy was escorted out, hands behind his back, surrounded by officers. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions he couldn't answer. And although no conviction had been made, the moment the video hit the internet, people said the same thing. This is it. The truth finally caught up. This was the turning point. The moment everything shifted from rumor to reality, from whispers to handcuffs, from speculation to charges. The world had waited 28 years for justice, and now, for the first time, it was standing at Diddy's front door.